Not so brief as I wish to, and the next speaker is my lecturer before, Miss Sandra Levane, who will tell about challenges and problems we are facing in preserving historical wooden architecture of Jūrmala, a resort in Latvia. So, and we switch over from small town, a little old town, to urban environment. So it seems that Jūrmala is the most criticized city about the most important part of genuine original substance, which is wooden architecture in Jūrmala. Of course, critics is heavily on authentic historical substance and their losses. At the same time, I would like to comment and defend our aspirations and the ban that myth to characterize by characterizing and sharing how we are dealing and handling that historical substance, especially in nowadays. I also have a very long presentation, and I have some doubts that we will reach the end of it, but at least part will be also included in our discussion later on at our panel discussion. So, to our foreign guests and friends, Jūrmala city consists actually of several railway stations and inhabited places, populated places, and of the new construction regulations of Jūrmala have been adopted. We have protected urban architecture of national protection significance, of regional significance, and that is 14.5 of constructed area of the city itself is protected. There are houses and buildings we are protecting as Jūrmala municipality, several thousands of them. And if we are looking at the map of Jūrmala city in greater detail, they are marked and spotted, researched and studied. Similarly as throughout Latvia, starting from 2022, city municipalities have taken over all the buildings which were under supervision and monitoring of national monument protection inspections, and a separate municipal institution. This is our center of cultural environment, which preserves cultural and architectural monuments and are supervising all local protected areas, historical buildings under protection, and also background buildings. Our main task is administrative monitoring and supervision of all the projects for restoration, reconstruction, protection. We own also all cultural and artistic monuments in Jūrmala, which are sculptures, outdoor monuments, etc. We are dealing also with popularization, raising awareness regarding cultural heritage. And yesterday we had the awarding ceremony of the best restored sites in Jūrmala, exactly yesterday evening. I am working since spring 2022 in the center, and I'm actually architect with my own practice turn and private customers turning into an administrator to some extent. So I'm a very good, trained and equipped with knowledge regarding wooden architecture, historical wooden buildings, but in Jūrmala, wooden building heritage was a surprise to myself as well.
From 2019 to 2023, so 3,000 objects were inspected, some approximately 200 of buildings had their status changed. Some were upgraded, some were downgraded. Coming back to my experience with wooden architecture, despite the fact that I live in Jūrmala for several years, and what I knew, nevertheless, Jūrmala's wooden architecture was a surprise to me. How come? And the reason is that wooden architecture is the most fragile way. It's difficult to keep, but especially it's difficult to keep in Jūrmala. Shortly speaking, the reason is that Jūrmala was built over a very short period of time. At the beginning of 19th century, development started. It was rather poor at the time. And then local business was mainly targeted as rent houses for spa guests, and majority of wooden houses were built within the time period of 40 years up till the First World War. What is special about these buildings? All of them are summer houses. All buildings are very fragile, and I would say extremely fragile. What I mean by this? Later on, I'll touch upon specific analysis which I base to construction engineer Bērzupe. We use her books a lot, and architect Tāles Timpers also contributed. And what's important here that summer houses, building houses, we see that it says summer houses in Jūrmala. From environmental perspective, there is also special weather conditions, high groundwater levels. Woods are always wet. Foundations are wet, and obviously that negatively contributes. Also, this capacity of ground bearing it is much lower in Jūrmala, and this all leaves some consequences to Jūrmala's houses, but also nature is very leaves a specific impact. Sometimes, for example, I see in a neighborhood there is fire, and it turns out that there are smoke coming from fir trees, and it's pollen. In fact, it was only pollen, and obviously it also impacts wooden architecture. So coming back to Madame Bērzupes, she said that it's 50 years, what is the length of building, and anything above 50 years, it's already a big bonus. Now, in Jūrmala, the oldest buildings in Jūrmala are 150, 110 years old. So we can say that in Jūrmala, it's already, these many buildings are lived much more than they were technically capable to live. Also, they lived through the Second World War, the Soviet times, so we can say that many of these houses are in quite good condition, actually. Then also there's seasonality, which I should mention. There's no big foundations there. We also need warming, heat protection, also. So materials are relatively light, if I can put it that way. So from this photo, you might understand that I like technical surveys. I think that there's lots of information that's comes from these documents. Initially, I thought, why things happen the way they do? And when reading about technical solutions, I came to understand why situation with wooden heritage is the way it is. So let me shortly come upon this. So first of all, foundation. There's a very short freezing distance. For smaller houses, it's 50 centimeters. For two-floor buildings, it's 70 to 80 centimeters. But typical is approximately 1 brick, very seldomly 2 bricks, and sometimes only just a half brick. And it's typical for many buildings. And sometimes it's surprising. Then also one should take into account hydro-isolation was not very widely used, and there's lots of wetness, lots of water in Jūrmala. This all leaves influence on buildings. So as to foundations, these foundations are in ground, and also street level changes impacted this, how foundations are. So first was a first floor building. This survey was done on 2-floor building, and what I found, in surprise to me, I found that it's only half a brick foundation. When I found out, I looked into my house and I found exactly the same. There's 1 brick depth used as foundation. So foundations are weak, not very strong. And obviously, this is one of the most difficult moments when we how to go about renovation. Here, Agents Laube, architect of this summer house, it's built in 1912, and it's being renovated now. The photo is taken from the 20s of the last century, and here we see situations that everything is built in dunes, and the house is below Dunes Mountain. And here's what happens at this time. The house is undergoing deformation, and one corner, one side of the house towards dune, it's 40 centimeters. It's located 40 centimeters under the ground level, and this building, it has the project which is being prepared, and if it's going to be done, it's very technically complex project. The idea is to raise the house. Engineers want to join this house and move it to the wall, and then reconstruct. So I'm following how successful they are in this project. Then there's also a story of walls. And 50 to 100 years for protected, from constructions protected from rain. But in Jūrmala, typically we have buildings of laid planks, of built planks, and many of these logs are put in the way that are not very beneficiary for long life. So there are logs. Then there are technical solutions on walls, And then sometimes what can happen, there can be 2.5 centimeters thick wallpapers. Also, we have to take into account that it's 65 square meters large, typically. Then we also have log buildings where logs are laid vertically. And there's no warming, no heat insulation process performed on these walls. So for example, Museum of Aspasia, reconstruction is done relatively recently in 2014. And restoration was done in a good way. Original material substance was kept. Also supports were built in where necessary. And here you see what happens now. It's the same pergola, veranda, and for Jūrmala, remember that woods are always wet, and this wood would spoil, would rot eventually, and this is what happens now. There's going to be a new restoration is needed. Condition is critical, and it happened over a relatively short period of time. So you also see the paint. It can also be said of technical details of detailing, and another. So there are two important parts. One is foundation, the other is roof. And because we should really pay lots of attention to roofs, because since destruction of houses, usually it happens like that, foundations deform, and then as soon as there is some damage to roof, the house would be destroyed relatively quickly. And here I wanted to draw an example. Here you see a sculpture, skies, and it's a granite. It's a granite and it's polished granite. We also are responsible of monuments, and here I thought, okay, nothing would happen to this object. Maybe surface needs to be cleaned. But when you see how this looks like, so, and this is polished granite. So this in Jūrmala, it looks like that. And this happened in 10 years' time. So what can I say? The impact of nature is really huge. So here I want to speak of floors. So the photo is taken in August of this year, after the storm we had in the summer. My house is in a very good shape. So southern facade, for the third time, the facade painting is made for the third time, but nevertheless this paint is not stable, it peels off. Foundations are being strengthened. Windows are with can be opened internally. Some words about Jūrmala's wooden architecture. So wonder of this architecture is wooden carvings, and this is really something special about local architecture. And but taking into account that many buildings are privately owned, So the house owners do their best what they can. And here you see these carvings are the last things they usually do.
Now, therefore, that original substance disappears. Still, at the same time, I would like to, perhaps I do not manage to, but I would like to brief that we have a rare number of unmodified houses. We have restored houses without any large-scale reconstruction or extension. We have quite plain, or in majority of cases, these are supplemented buildings instead of formal replicas. But we have quite a number of disintegrating houses and damaging houses. At the same time, apart from our annual contests or competitions of restored houses which are not modified. I'm sorry, I have some technical issues with the pointer. So the first building I was showing, a previous one, that these are a small number of houses which were restored by owners. For 30 years, everything was done fragment by fragment, and I consider these to be the most valuable houses and buildings. So, some rebuilt, restored, reconstructed buildings and houses which are restored. These would not be replicas, but close to the original. These are villas like that, and this is architectural award to dwelling house at Bulduru Boulevard, which is restored by cleaning up those historical strata of Soviet time and returning to original substance of these extended supplemented houses, which people wish to live in Jūrmala and live constantly and permanently. That is the main reason when people cannot afford to maintain two properties, and most often they choose to live in Jūrmala. And then thermal insulation, retrofitting, consolidation, and extensions follow because original houses are very small. Some are within the Venice Charter, modern extensions to Andris Kronberg's authorship, but restoration of the original house of very high quality. As regards extensions or supplements, to what extent we can extend our original substance and original proportion of the building. That was not a will, but very wonderful summer house. There have been some changes in some details. We understand that, of course, the upper part was restored and reconstructed due to technical considerations, but as we are speaking about development and our maintenance of heritage. So backyard looked like that. The owners didn't manage to build the house to the end before World War II. And here is quite a dilemma according to Venice Charter. Is it a fake or a replica or falsification? I might say that not. And there was a modern extension added later on during. So this is dwelling house of Kristaps Zariņš at Dzintaru Avenue 42, very close to the street, plank house. And that was modified, and you can see that veranda or this porch was included into indoors. But when In modern time, that house is located 2 meters next to the fence and to the street and driving part. They chose to really fence and glaze that porch to extend some living space. Perhaps the last example I would like to show, which could be criticized about loss and negligence of historical, original, authentic substance to some extent, but in 90s of the previous century, some illegal construction, reconstruction of building was started in reinforced concrete and some mafia involved. But nowadays, the building was to some extent returned back to similarly or similar, close to original substance copies. In this case, I might say to use word copy, not a replica, and we might speak about ruins, deteriorated houses or remains of houses with totally lost technical status. So this, as you can see, Ludda Schmidt Grammar School by Alfred Architect Agents Laube. And by 2001 was deteriorated, there was fire going on as well. And in 2018, Jūrmala municipality had a program of forced alienation or expropriation of these remains of the house, and private owner wished to sell it, and Jūrmala municipality has bought the house, which is Vaivari Primary School, which is currently designed, and all the details are coordinated to be adopted. That will be precise copy, and this was a lucky coincidence for this forced expropriation in favor of the municipality. This is opposite to the summer house to president's residence in Jūrmala, and once it was architectural board of Jūrmala. So that is totally disintegrated in last 20 years, and Jūrmala has repeatedly proposed to so some technical assistance needed once again. If we are speaking about and discussing about buildings which are deteriorating and disintegrating, which we can call ruins or remains, in general, Jūrmala tries to solve the problem and is legally coordinated with the Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Finance and with the Parliament of Latvia. One of the aspects is that we are dismantling, the municipality is dismantling preserves for some time. But the idea is that site might be restored and assembled again. This is forced expropriation, but it is possible for in the light of public interest. But the status of those houses and buildings is not changed. They still remain to be a monument, and the house was just bought by Jūrmala municipality, and a new young person came. I am from Pumpuri. That will be a family dwelling house after restoration. So Jūrmala, similarly to other municipalities, support with co-financing. It was more problematic to Jūrmala because we have a lot of private ownership. and may not be transferred, may not be financed from a municipal co-financing, and we have managed and succeeded in all the houses, even if these are privately owned, that was just renovated and the restored house, and the storm came, and so some damage was caused. Jūrmala municipality also understands that we have very tangible, but still very sensitive and very soft heritage we must maintain and we must preserve. Thank you very much to Miss Sandra Levane for insight into challenges of wooden ensembles restoration and site, as well as ownership of Jūrmala municipality in restoring. We have seen two interpretations of the Venice Charter, Kuldīga and Jūrmala, and let us take site far, which from here it is Riga, for discussion or for reflection. What, according to the Venice Charter, replica, extension, supplement would mean in the context of what is a precise copy, to what extent decoration, finishing, structure are considered, or is it a question to be discussed every time